It is incredibly rare to sit down with somebody that's built a 9-figure behemoth on the Amazon channel and beyond. But today, I got the chance to do exactly that. Sitting down with Mike Beckham, one of the founders of Simple Modern, who has built a behemoth physical products brand in the drinkware space. We get into not only his origin story before building Simple Modern, but equally important, the steps, the chapters, and the lessons that he learned building a 9-figure behemoth.
You could read a lot of books about how to swim, but it's still going to be a pretty difficult experience. The way you learn to swim more than anything else is by getting in there and doing it. I think that's entrepreneurship. That night, you wake up in a cold sweat.
Oh yeah.
You're like, what have I done? I've probably bankrupted us. I bought way too much stuff. Every good idea is going to have competition, and that shouldn't scare us. What that competition shows is there's a lot of demand for what you're doing.
There's an incredible amount of value-packed gems in this interview, including his advice for entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs like you. So sit back. I think you're really gonna like this one. All right, so I am super incredibly excited to have this interview today. You know, I've been in the Amazon game for about 4 years or so, and I've encountered a lot of really cool stories of solo entrepreneurs that have taken things to 7 figures. There's a handful that have taken it to the 8-figure level, but it is incredibly rare air to find an entrepreneur from scratch that's scaled to 9 figures plus. And that's exactly the conversation we're going to have today with Mike Beckham, who has built an amazing business in Simple Modern, taking on some of the behemoths of the water bottle space like Yeti and Hydro Flask. And we're going to get into how it started, what the build was like, expanding omni-channel, and everything in between. So Mike, I'm not just saying this because we're doing an interview. I'm legitimately personally excited to understand your story and hear everything about the journey to build Simple Modern. So thanks for jumping on Heist, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, Adam, thanks for having me. Excited to be with you today.
Awesome. So let's I always like to start about the pre-story. I mean, it's a unique story unto itself, but there's always a prelude to the big narrative. So I just want to understand your story before Simple Modern and kind of what drew you to that journey and what drew you to building a powerhouse physical products brand.
My history has kind of 3 chapters. My career has kind of 3 chapters. I was a finance guy in college, met my wife, got graduated. We got married a week after I graduated. So she and I have been married almost 20 years, but she was finishing up a bachelor's and master's combo degree in accounting and had 1 more year of school when we were first married. And so through a series of events, instead of going and working in some kind of a finance job, I had an opportunity to work in kind of a ministry nonprofit job that I did. And I thought, I'll be close to campus, you know, she'll be going through school and then I'll probably go work in the business world. And kind of to my surprise, 1 year turned into 2, turned into almost 10, where I was working in the nonprofit world. So by the time I got to 30, it was kind of like, well, I guess I'm not going to be doing some of the things I thought I would do in the business world, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with people. I think it brought out kind of some of the better parts of me being in the nonprofit world. About that time, my younger brother, who's about 2.5 years younger than me, he had been doing some affiliate marketing. So this is like 2007, 2008, which really is when Google and Facebook, I think, are first starting to figure out digital marketing and starting to monetize their products. And he had done really well doing affiliate marketing, but he wanted to start like more of a product centric business. He approached me and said, hey, would you be interested in helping me kind of create a team? And we had an idea. There was a company over in Europe doing this auction model that we thought was interesting. For me, I thought, oh, this is a fun side project. You know, I love my day job, but this is a fun side project. So sure, helped him launch the company. That was October 2009. By November 2010, that company was doing more than $1 million in revenue a day.
Wow.
Which was just a wild kind of experience. I mean, I was the oldest person at the company. I was 30. And it wasn't even my full-time job, you know, so it was like totally, you know, the way I describe it is the inmates running the asylum. It was just a very unique circumstance. And then around that same time, my wife and I got pregnant with our first, my son Carter. And I just realized, okay, I'm not going to be able to kind of do all these things at the level that I'd want to. And that led to kind of the first big transition in my career where it's like I moved from the nonprofit world to the for-profit world, running e-commerce companies with my brother. We launched several more companies that I think ranged from pretty big failures all the way to, pretty successful ventures. In the process, just learned a ton. By the time it got to be about 2015, this kind of random group of guys in the middle of Oklahoma had been a part of as much e-commerce as almost anyone that wasn't an early employee at Amazon. So we had learned a ton. One of the things about e-commerce that, Adam, I know you're aware of is you have to be good at a lot of different things. There's a lot of different elements, whether it's sourcing or legal or, conversion rate optimization or digital marketing or product design, like we could name a big list. I felt like I had developed a lot of skills and I really wanted to start a company of my own where I set the culture and built it around a kind of a set of principles. And so a couple of guys that I worked with for several years with my brother approached me one day and said, "Hey, we'd really love to work with you if you're open to it." And that group of the three of us ended up becoming the founding team for Simple Modern. When we started, we did not know what we wanted to sell. I think really the one thing we knew was we've got a lot of expertise with e-commerce and particularly like the Amazon marketplace. We feel like we could do really well there as our first channel. And so we knew we wanted to sell on the Amazon marketplace. We wanted to sell a really high quality product that like wouldn't break and wouldn't have bad customer experiences. And that was it, man. I think we also probably knew the culture that we wanted to have because we'd worked together for several years and we knew we wanted to have some kind of a generosity piece to the company. Back when I worked in the nonprofit world, I actually raised my salary. So I've actually been all the way across the spectrum in terms of like people paying, so that I could actually do my job all the way to now I get to support a lot of things. So anyway, that's what we knew. And we started out with a couple of products, like I think one was a stainless steel tea infuser, one was a silicone baking mat. And we had just enough success that I think it really confirmed, hey, we can do this. As we continued to look at products and what we thought was compelling, we came across insulated drinkware. And obviously that's kind of the match that lit the fuse of what Simple Modern's turned into.
Love it, man. So a couple things there, like threads, both with your brother's company and then getting into Simple Modern. I think a lot of people think that they need to have it all figured out before they hit go. You know what I mean? Like, and there's a discomfort if I don't know all the pieces, right? Like I need it to be 100% before I'm comfortable doing it. Walk me through a little bit of like the mentality and the framework and the psychology around making the leap from what was a comfortable, fulfilling existence with the nonprofit world to your brother's company, and then taking, what I would imagine was a incredible foundation of success and then kind of starting over from scratch. Like, what got you comfortable doing that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I've seen a couple of people comment on this recently, so I think it's worth saying. There are some things in life that are more caught than taught, and I think entrepreneurship is one of those things. One way of illustrating this idea, imagine that you don't know how to swim. You could read a lot of books about how to swim, but it's still going to be a pretty difficult experience the first time you jump in water and try to swim, because the way you learn to swim more than anything else is by getting in there and doing it and struggling with it. I think that's entrepreneurship. For sure. For me personally, I really love learning. I'm naturally curious. I like being pushed. And so I think all three of those things mattered a lot, making a transition from one career to really something totally different. I think I had some aptitude, whether it was with numbers or ways of thinking that lent themselves to being more effective in kind of an e-commerce business context. But I was raw, I started doing this stuff at really like 30. And so number one, there weren't a lot of people that really knew how to do e-commerce in general because e-commerce as a whole was just kind of developing. But then especially, I hadn't been in the business world for several years. And so I had to really embrace and the opportunity to learn and to grow. From my perspective, a characteristic that I see in all of the most successful people I know is just a desire to learn, a desire to challenge themselves, a desire to continue to grow, to do things that are hard, and things that they don't know how to do, to be willing to take those on. So for me, it was all those things. It's always difficult when you start over anywhere. Like it was kind of a start over when I went into working full time in the business world. And then it was a start over when we restarted, with Simple Modern. I'd been in kind of an established company, and I was starting over again. My perspective is, more than anything else, mindset. It will give you a leading indicator of how successful somebody is going to be, because we're not able to control our circumstances, but we are able to control how we respond to them. I think over the last 10 years, 12 years or whatever, I've been able to develop a mindset of expecting challenges, expecting being in situations where I don't know how to do things, actually relishing the opportunity to learn from those. Because even once we moved into Simple Modern and we became successful in kind of the Amazon and digital realm, then there was this whole other learning curve of, we want to move into physical retail, and I knew nothing about that. So it's a whole new opportunity to challenge yourself and to learn and to figure out how to become excellent in a new area.
You touched on something that I thought was really interesting, and it's a belief that I have too. An item I really like to kind of leverage when I'm thinking about what projects I embark on and what business initiatives we kind of pursue. Building something cool and substantial is one thing, but I think how you do it is as important as what you do, if not more important. And there's ways to hack, there's ways to get financial success by just going after the money, but maybe talk through a little bit about that foundational purpose and value system that you kind of ingrained from the get-go before Simple Modern kind of took on a life of its own and had its own kind of business success, and why you did that, and kind of maybe what some of those foundational elements are for you.
I think absolutely that's one of the more distinctive parts of Simple Modern, and probably one of the most significant things I've learned in life. One of the ways I'd start here, Adam, what everybody's after with their career is quality of life. That's what we all want. Quality of life we find is a little bit more elusive than we would initially think. It's easy to think, if I just had this much money, then I would definitely have quality of life. Or if things just look like X. And sometimes as we get older, we realize, it's not quite that simple. So I think one of the things that being in the nonprofit world did is it helped me to do a couple things. Have a really solid kind of worldview. What do I want to try and accomplish in my life? And what are the things that I think are really important in life? And then over the last 10 years of my career or so, being really deliberate in making sure, even in a business context, I'm still prioritizing those things. For example, understanding, relationships are probably the most important thing in life. As my relationships go, probably my quality of life goes the same way. When you start having kids, this is just an example, but when you start having kids, it's very difficult to get time with any of your friends. There's been a lot of research done on this, that in America, the average 37-year-old man says he has 1 or 0 friends. It's some kind of crazy number. But it's easy to understand how it happens. Your responsibilities at work, your responsibilities with your family become very large, and it's hard to make time. And so I realized that, hey, for me to be deliberate in relationships, the people I work with every day, those relationships have to be meaningful and significant. And so that's an aspect of the company, is we really try and build a company where connection with each other, it's more than just, hey, we transact with each other and we hire a bunch of people that can do the job, but we're trying to create kind of an environment where people are really connected with each other and are really for each other. I think another kind of paradigm that I'll use to think about success is, when I'm 80, what will I care about from this period of my life? What will be the memories that stick? What will be the things that matter? Surprising amount of the time, there are things that feel like a big deal at the time that in retrospect weren't and don't matter to me in retrospect, or didn't really drive quality of life. I'm constantly trying to make decisions with our company culture, our company giving, the products that we get into. When I'm looking back on this period, how am I going to evaluate the time that I invested here? One of the ways I'll communicate it is, when I'm 80, I'm not going to remember how much revenue we did this calendar year. It seems like a big deal to me right now, but I'm just not going to care that much. But I am going to care about the relationships. I am going to care about, hey, how did I impact the other people that I worked with and the community I live in? That's going to matter actually quite a bit to me. And so when you can kind of take this first principles approach to things and work downward from there, what are the most important things? Okay, with that in mind, how do I want to build a culture where those things are prioritized and those things are true? And as a result, I think one other piece, this is a good example of one that really contributes to the business success also. Personal growth is a big part of quality of life, I think. All of us feel like we're the happiest when we feel like we're growing as people, growing our skill sets, growing our relationships, achieving new highs. So we've tried to create a culture where excellence and growth mindset and some of these things are really prioritized. So when I go to work every day, I'm surrounded by people that are really challenging themselves and pushing themselves. And they're cheering me on and I'm cheering them on. And it creates this environment, not only where the company does its best work, and I think that's a big part of why we've been so successful, but also where I experience this really high quality of life as we're doing that work because of the environment that I'm doing it in. When we go through every new hire, I have a sheet that has all our mission, vision, and values on it. One of the things that I communicate is like, when you look at our mission statement and all the explanation, you wouldn't even necessarily guess that we sell water bottles. It's really a lot more about the way that we want to interact with work and our coworkers, and the way that we want to grow personally, the way we want to impact the community. There's all these things and it's like, we want to do all these things, and it just so happens that we sell water bottles because this is really what we're about and really what we're trying to create. I think that that's one of the reasons why I was so excited about founding my own company, is that as a founder, you just have a unique voice to be able to set direction and to say, this is why this company exists. I know because I helped create it, and it exists for this reason. And you have a unique voice to be able to cast vision and to set values for the organization. And then you're able to be hopefully really deliberate in terms of the team members that you add to the organization, that you're really recruiting around that vision. And when you do that, if you get to 40, 50, 70 people like we are now, it actually becomes really powerful. You create just an incredible amount of organizational inertia towards the right things. And I think that most people are able to see our bottles on shelves and see the product, but the team behind it, I think, is what makes the company special and what allows us to make such good products. And all of that flows back to the culture and some of these things we're talking about.
Yeah, man, I really love that. Peeling back the onion a little bit, I think that there's like chapters or phases to every business, and the challenges and the solutions that come up change. If you could just walk me through some of the chapters of Simple Modern, from the inception point to finding initial success, and then as you scale, there's working capital constraints, there's people stuff, the fires get bigger and more diverse, and the channels expand, etc. If you could maybe just spend a little bit of time maybe walking through those chapters as you recall them for building Simple Modern.
It's a great question. I really spend time thinking, like, if I was going to write a book, where are the chapter breaks? Like, what's the narrative? So I think the very first chapter of any venture is the 0 to 1. It's when it goes from conceptual to like you are actually doing things. It's easy to underestimate, I think, how much that's the most important and the most difficult. The number of things that die in the ideation phase is vast. This is one of the reasons why people that are experienced entrepreneurs are always like, it's not about the idea, it's about execution, because people have lots of ideas. I am sure I was like the 8 millionth person that had an idea that a water bottle company could be a good idea. It's like there's nothing original to the idea. What's made the company special has been the execution on the idea. So for us, it was just, we're going to do this. We file an LLC. We make an initial PO. You do those very first steps where you're like, we're going to do this. I think for us, the second chapter was really about finding product market fit. And we really started with a high level of confidence in channel. We thought Amazon FBA as a channel has a ton of potential, but finding that's the market kind of, and finding what is the product that makes the most sense for us to sell in that market. I think that took us a few months. And obviously we ended up landing on insulated drinkware as the first product where it really fit. There were a lot of observations that happened during that period. It wasn't just insulated drinkware. It was that we realized this is really kind of like a watch. These bottles that we're selling, they're like a watch or like shoes. There's a fashion piece to these. And during this period, Yeti was still selling just stainless steel. There wasn't a lot of creativity or imagination from most companies in this space in terms of the aesthetics. We saw a couple of companies that we thought were doing some really interesting things, and we realized the combination of the Amazon FBA channel and then a differentiation around ornamentation. And then finally, we realized, hey, we can sell a premium product at a much lower price than some of our competitors. Kind of the intersection of those three things, I think, is where we got to product market fit, where we launched the product and it was like, okay, this is working. People are buying it. The reviews are coming in great. The feedback we're getting from friends and family that get this is really positive. This seems like we've got a match here. Like you mentioned, we were bootstrapped. We've never taken outside capital. And so that's an incredibly daunting task when you're growing an inventory-based business, especially one that's growing really fast.
Yeah.
So the third chapter was probably two different things happened. One was we began to grow the Amazon business. And that, I describe it to people kind of like this. My life for like years was we get a shipment in, and almost immediately you realize, wow, at the rate this stuff is selling, we're going to be out of stock. I didn't buy enough. I need to write a PO. So you kind of look at your finances, and then you write the PO. And then you're like, at the very last minute, you're like, I'm going to be even more aggressive because last time I didn't buy enough. And you add 20%, you send it off. That night, you wake up, in a cold sweat.
Oh yeah.
You're like, what have I done? I've probably bankrupted us. I bought way too much stuff. You wait 2 months, it gets in, and within a week, you realize I didn't buy enough, and you just rinse and repeat. So that there were just order after order of that sequence happened. The other thing that happened that was pretty significant from a working capital perspective is I had this vision that nobody had really done insulated drinkware with licensing as well as I felt like it could have been done. It was either a little bit cheesy, or it was overpriced, or wasn't very good quality, just depending on the brand offering it. A lot of it wasn't even kind of really branded. It was like really the licensed property was the focus, and it was just from kind of almost a generic company that you'd never heard of. And I just thought, hey, there's an opportunity here. If I had known at the time how impossible it is to get licensed, I probably never would have done it. And it really brings up a principle about entrepreneurship, which is it takes a certain level of naivete, to do anything. It's like Han Solo, never tell me the odds. It's like, if you really understood what it would take for your vision to come together, you could easily sit and pick out the 10 reasons why you shouldn't do it. And this is why 0 to 1 is so hard. The longer you're in the ideation phase, the easier it is to just start talking yourself into why it's a bad idea. My blind optimism, my naivete, whatever it was, I kind of pursued this licensing idea, and I was able to get OU to give me what's called a local license. I was able to take that and make samples that then I took and showed to a buyer at Sam's Club who was at that exact moment in time looking for exactly what I had and wanted to write a very big order around exactly that. I didn't have any of the other licenses, so that set off this whole other process where I had to try and scramble and see if I could actually get all of these organizations, these universities, to want to be a part of this multi-million-dollar opportunity. We were able to. And the biggest thing that did is it gave me a little bit of a financial clarity about the future where I could go and start to add to the team. And that's where we went from 3 co-founders working at night and not taking hardly anything in salary to hiring 7 other people. Everybody's full-time, everybody's on salary. Still didn't have an office. The office was still my house at that point. But we were like moving towards an actual company. And then I think that there was a phase where we started to really become pretty dominant on Amazon. That was kind of a chapter, and branching into other products. And then there was us moving into mass retail. Really big partner on our branded products was Target, partnership that's been fantastic for us and that we've really appreciated. And then it's moved in recent years wider. Now we're in Walmart nationwide. As I mentioned, we do quite a bit of stuff in Sam's Club as well. And so that was like a whole nother area to learn and a whole nother amount of working capital that we needed to kind of be able to support our retail partners. And then finally, right now, I think the thing that's exciting is we've really branched into kids products, which has gone fantastic. And we are now going after domestic manufacturing. To do domestic manufacturing, you kind of have to have a few things going on. You have to have significant volume. You have to have a margin structure where it makes sense and really moves the ball. And you have to, I think, from my perspective, it's probably helpful if you're independently owned because it's a pretty big, significant investment. Kind of have the ingredients where we're feeling confident to invest, probably tens of millions of dollars over the coming years, probably make our first bottle here within the next 3 or 4 weeks domestically. And so we're really excited about learning about that and finding ways that we can create better products, better value for the customer, be a better partner to our retail partners. It's an exciting time, man.
Love it. So there's one part of that growth story I just want to hone in on.
Yeah.
And then we'll wrap up with kind of your thoughts on and advice for other folks starting out. A lot of people start retail first, at least traditionally, and they've got, for folks that don't know, there's a margin structure called keystone margins in retail. So basically, if something costs $100, you sell it to the retailer for 50, and yours is roughly 50%. So your COGS are 25. It's a little hard to pull that off, or in most categories, most products, it's hard to pull that off and be price competitive, which is necessary for a lot of categories for sales velocity. So that's why a lot of brick and mortar big brand retail comes in and they play on brand because the price is never going to quite win. The inverse from starting digitally native first or Amazon native first is you can really dial in that margin structure and compete, get the sales velocity, build proof of concept on the channel and kind of blow it up. But it becomes a little bit tricky to navigate into retail. That's why most people, either add new products, variations, they do geographic expansion, and that kind of taps them out. Very few people know that playbook of transcending into licensing, retail, etc. What do you think that nugget was for you? Because I think it's pretty rare air for a brand that's Amazon native, even a substantial brand that's Amazon native, to make that transition.
Yeah.
So maybe walk through that playbook a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, each of the different channels, costs and the margins look different depending on how big your product is and how inexpensive it is to ship. Like there can be some pretty significant differences, and trying to marry all of those things together in one cohesive strategy is the challenge that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I'll just give some kind of principles. One is the problem that most D2C brands can have. They price around kind of a D2C acquisition strategy, and they have to build 30 or 40% for marketing. 30-40% of their retail cost is covering their customer acquisition cost. So if you try to take that into a physical retail context, it's challenging because you just look very out of step with the market in terms of pricing. But you can't put your pricing at the same place as what's going on in mass retail because of what you're doing on D2C. And so the principle I would say is, if I was starting from scratch, the channel that you start in matters a lot about what your potential future paths that are open to you look like. To me, like starting with Amazon, we didn't know this at the time, but it was really wise because the pricing to be competitive on Amazon was higher than you would see in most mass retailers, like a Walmart or a Target, but not so high that you couldn't find a way to make it all work. Whereas if we'd started D2C, we probably would have priced our product at a place where I don't think it ever would have made sense in mass retail. There's another principle here, which is whatever your first channel is, as you go into subsequent channels, they're going to look at that channel and they're going to say, that's the value that the market's kind of agreed upon for your price. So there was a point where we thought about going into Walmart really early on, and Walmart's a fantastic partner, but I think if we'd gone there very early, I think it would have really stunted the growth of the company, because the retails we would have been at, it would have kind of pigeonholed us into that's our channel. Whereas by starting with Amazon, we could kind of creep outward on both sides. We could do some things D2C that were a little bit higher price point and a little bit more unique and bespoke. We could come down a little bit on price point and make the mass retail work. So there's another kind of principle here which is worth thinking about, which is the number one challenge for any business is customer acquisition. How are you going to acquire customers, and how are you going to affordably do it? The thing that's fantastic about partnering with Target, Walmart, Amazon is that as a brand, you're acquiring customers in a way where you're really profitable on day one with almost all customers. Most of the time when you're acquiring customers digitally for like a D2C, you might try and hope for a 3-month payback or something, but you're not profitable on day one. So one of the stats that I'll tell people about our business that shocks them is we spend between 1% and 2% of our revenue on marketing. At the beginning, it was kind of out of necessity. We didn't have enough margin with our pricing structure to be able to pay $20 to go acquire a customer on Facebook or somewhere else. So instead, we had to really think creatively of how do we leverage the customer bases that these major retailers have, and how do we partner with them in a way where we have great pricing and great product for the price, and we're not having to spend a bunch of money convincing people to buy our product on customer acquisition costs. That's probably the main advice I'd give. Where you start matters. The more that you can build your model around organic customers acquisition, the better. Now, there's some models where that's not realistic, where it's like, hey, this needs to be paid acquisition. And I think that can work great. I have friends. I was actually at a meetup this last Friday with a whole bunch of people running 9-figure D2C brands, and they're obviously all spending significantly on customer acquisition and doing extremely well. It's just they're very limited in terms of what the opportunities are in physical retail because of that acquisition cost and margin structure and everything else. So we got lucky, I think is the message I'd say, Adam. We didn't know all of these dynamics when we started. But if I was going to start over, I think I would start with what's a place where I can get an overlap of all the circles of D2C and Amazon and Target and Walmart and Club. Is there a place I can put a product where I can make it work in all these different channels? And then, okay, I'm going to probably start digitally with somebody like Amazon. I can test a bunch of stuff in lower quantities. I can learn rapidly. I can find what works. Because when you go into mass retail, you might sell 150,000 of a single SKU. Even early on with Amazon, when we were really successful, it's like, I think we only had a handful of SKUs that sold more than 500 a year because we had a lot of different variations. So it's just a totally different ball game. Being able to test digitally and then saying, okay, now that I have all these learnings, now I'm going to go big. Now I'm going to make a ton of this unit. Made a lot of sense for us.
Man, I love that. And honestly and truly, like in all my years of kind of consuming content and hearing what other people have to say, I don't think anyone's ever broken down those mechanics and dynamics like you just did. So incredible sound bites there. Appreciate you sharing that. So I guess in the interest of imparting wisdom on the broader community, maybe we'll wrap it with the final question, Mike. I've heard you talk about counterfactuals regarding kind of looking back and what you do again. And I think it's super on point. If we gave you the exact same amount of money, knowledge, whatever else, and said, hey, we want you to go build an insulated water bottle company today with that resource and those dynamics. Maybe you'd be successful, maybe you wouldn't, but it certainly wouldn't play out the way it has in your story just because variables are dynamic. But I'm sure there are some foundational things that you know to be true that you've built up here over the last 5 to 7 years, kind of building Simple Modern. I'm curious for somebody that is stepping from career that is either a nonprofit or working for another business, and you've got that itch, you understand the value system and the things that matter for your life, and you feel like e-commerce, Amazon, whatever the vehicle is the key to unlocking that. How would you go about doing it if you're that person?
Absolutely. So I've thought about this question because I don't think I could recreate what we've done in drinkware if I tried today. If I tried to, it would be a very slow process comparatively, maybe even impossible. So how would I approach it if I was starting a business today? The first thing I would do is there's some tools. Google Trends is a tool. Amazon has some great tools. You can look at emerging categories. So the first thing I would do is I would say, depending on my level of expertise, I want to find an emerging category. If I have a lot of expertise in e-commerce, I might look for a really big emerging category. If I have less, I might look for a more niche emerging category. So something where it's fairly early on, but there's a clear growth trajectory. And as you look at it, it doesn't feel like a fad, but it feels like a larger kind of trend. So a great example might be like, at one point keto was an emerging trend, or lower sugar, or, there's tons of things with supplements. There's been a lot over the last 10 years of trends that you could kind of see and be like, hey, this isn't just becoming kind of trendy. There's kind of some health reasons. This is like a larger secular trend. So I would look for that first. And there's some great tools to find that. Then I would say I would focus on learning, really understanding what do customers want and absorbing as much information as I possibly could. I think more than anything else, your level of curiosity and learning and understanding maps over an extended period of time maps the most closely to success. That sometimes you can know a lot about something and it just doesn't go well. I had a situation last week where I feel like that happened to me, where I wasn't able to convert what I knew about a situation into like the kind of results I wanted. But over a longer period of time, that's how it always works, is like the more you know and the more curious you are, that translates into seeing opportunities that you can take advantage of and that you can help supply what the market needs. Another principle that I would really focus on is building an exceptional team. There's a few pieces of capital that you need when you start a business. Intellectual capital, that's the learning piece. Financial capital, and that's kind of the piece where no matter where you are, you can figure that out. It's more possible than ever before to be working a job and on nights and weekends, finding ways to funnel that money into a side gig. But you do have to have financial capital. You got to have some place to start. But then I think the third piece is human capital. And ultimately, the teams that win have the best players. What I've been able to do here, I don't think speaks as much about our, special insight about water bottles as it does about getting a really special group of people together that happen to be focused on the problem of how do we make the best hydration products possible? How do we make the best, kids products possible? I think if you're doing those three things, you're going to be able to see opportunities. You're going to be able to start to take steps to test things. I guess I'll specifically call out this point. There's a great analogy, in the 1700s, 1800s, back when they would have these naval wars with ships and cannons, and you'd literally load in the cannonball and you'd shoot it at the other ship. The cannonballs were really expensive. And so you didn't want to fire the cannonball unless you felt like you were going to hit the other ship. The problem was these cannons were notoriously poor aim. So what they would do instead, before they shot the cannonball, is they would take a musket and they'd lay it on top of the cannon. And then they would shoot at the other ship at direct, exactly the angle that they would have shot the cannon at. And if the bullet hit the other ship, then they'd fire the cannon with the cannonball. Otherwise, you adjust the cannon. This same principle is really powerful when you're trying to start something. If you're using these kind of principles that I'm advocating, and then you say, I'm going to do firing little test balloons. One of the ways I explain it, which is, I think, helpful, is that what your job is when you're starting a company is to be running as many helpful experiments to learn as inexpensively as possible. And so that means the amount of money it costs, that means the amount of time it takes for you to learn. You're trying to maximize for learning, and you're doing that through experimentation. And you're just trying to experiment in a way where if you have an idea and you experiment and it turns out the opposite is true, that you're not like out of resources or dead in the water. So if you do those things, inevitably what it means is you're learning really quickly, you're dialing in a hypothesis about what the market needs, and then you get to the point where you're really like, okay, I really am ready to load up a cannonball and go after something. And then at that point, I think that you're likely to have really good success. The world needs good companies. And one of the things that you realize the more that you do entrepreneurship is there's a lot of mediocre companies in the world, and that there's always a shortage in the world of very well-run companies. This is why no industry is ever too competitive. I think you mentioned this at the beginning, this kind of perception that we need to run away from competition. And I wrote a thread on Twitter recently that got a lot of traction where I was talking about how that's kind of a trap. This idea that the best way to start a business is to find an idea that nobody's ever had before because you can run away from competition. The reality is almost every good idea is going to have competition. And that shouldn't scare us, because what that competition shows is there's a lot of demand for what you're doing. And no matter how competitive a particular product or vertical is, there's always room for another really well-run company in that vertical. These are some of the pieces of advice that I give to students. I teach these concepts at OU, and obviously I'm passionate about them. It's often messy, right? And it's been messy for me, but if you stick with those kind of thought processes, inevitably you do see opportunities, and hopefully you have a profitable business at the end.
Well, Mike, man, this is just absolutely incredible stuff. I mean, for me, and I'm sure the broader audience that's going to watch this, incredibly thankful for you taking out some time today. It really does mean a lot. One of the things I've reflected on as I started the YouTube channel and got a little bit more public facing and transparent and vulnerable with my thoughts and ideas. It's an incredible time to be an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur, and just to figure out what life's all about, because you now have access to people like you that are open enough to share their journey, their past, their edams. They're not always right. They're not always perfect, but I think that transparency has more of an impact than you can imagine. And one of the ways that we kind of started this conversation today is I found you on LinkedIn. And again, the chance to get somebody that's walked the path that you've walked, been able to take a step back, reflect, and impart and share transparently your thoughts on that journey publicly is incredibly valuable. So I found some amazing threads that you had on LinkedIn. I know you're very popular on Twitter as well. So for the folks in the heist community watching this, and others beyond that are like, man, I like this Mike guy, he's got some interesting ideas. Where can they find you next and follow the journey beyond this video?
Yeah, absolutely. On Twitter, you can find me at Mike Beckham SM. And then, as you mentioned, I'm on LinkedIn. And really, I try and use those platforms to talk about these type of things. I think the point that you made, Adam, that I would just emphasize is that I do not have it all figured out. And I don't have it all together. Nobody does. The world is full of imperfect people. I think one of the ways that we are able to pay it forward is when we're fortunate, we've gotten opportunities, and we've been successful, is to share that with other people. And that's really kind of the motivation for me. Is I feel exceptionally fortunate to be able to run Simple Modern as a company, and to be able to do what I do as a job. And so if I'm able to take the experiences and the access that I have and turn that into something that helps other young entrepreneurs, then I'm going to feel great about that. And that goes back to this idea of quality life. For me, feeling like I'm investing my time in helping other people, grow and become the best version of themselves, like that's incredibly motivating. And it's one of the reasons why I love the current job, that I'm able to be in a job where I'm able to do things like this. So appreciate you having me on the show,
Yeah,
Adam.
it's been awesome, man. Thanks again.